including us. But should I start anyway, because we are on a very precise schedule. All right. Good morning, everyone. I hope your morning's peaceful, and I hope that most of you have submitted your CU essay smoothly. This morning, we're going to have an induction to your dissertation module, and the morning session will consist of two small sessions. So firstly, I'm going to give you an induction to the module, which tells you about the most fundamental things about module, when to submit, how you should submit, what this module is about. Then the teacher has kindly offered a research methodology recap session, which will help you rewind your memory and rethink about the things that you pick up from last term's RME module. So welcome to your dissertation module. This module provides you the opportunity to kind of explore and disseminate the research trajectory of a written thesis in architecture and urbanism. So the most fundamental thing you should keep in mind now is that it's a written format piece of work. Now, so last term's research methodology and events course, or the RME course, together with your dissertation bootcamp and your dissertation proposal review, you have already developed an outline proposal. So this includes a particular research topic, specific research question, and your intended method. For this particular dissertation module, you'll be moving forward and to refine and execute your research proposal by producing a dissertation of approximately 10,000 words. And this provides you the opportunity to take some in-depth exploration of your topic of choice. The module carries 30 credits, and it's spread over the 3 terms, and it runs in parallel with your Studio B and Studio C. So I think it will be correct to say that this is the most long-term, important, and individual-based work. So remember, although we call this a dissertation module, but in a sense, this is your own dissertation. And this mainly brings out 2 considerations. Firstly, you are encouraged to develop the subject of your inquiry in the dissertation in parallel with your own interests, your career aspirations, and the content, possibly the content of your studio units. And the subject choosing will allow your specialisms to be placed within a deeper understanding of architecture and urbanism. And secondly, probably also the most important thing is that you should take full responsibility of your own work. So you are in charge of the development and overall work progress of your dissertation. So what it is, what is the module, and what do we expect? I have had the chance to review all of your proposals, and it seems most of you have already developed appropriate research topics within the wide research remit of architecture and urbanism. So that is a very positive start. And it partially shows us what you've extracted from last term's RME module and your Studio A work. So in this module, you should expect a certain depth from your work in addition to the previous width of your interest. I have listed out 6 specific learning outcomes for this module, which you can find in your module handbook. I will introduce you where to find it later on. In terms of the content of the dissertation, we expect you to, 1, demonstrate adequate knowledge of the histories and theories of architecture, urbanism, and related arts, technologies, and human sciences. And 2, you should show some knowledge of the fine arts as the influence on the quality of architectural and urban design. 3, you should demonstrate adequate knowledge of urban design, planning, and skills involved in the planning process. And 4, you should demonstrate an understanding of the socio and cultural aspects of architecture urbanism, which involves, for example, the relation between human and the built environment, and the need to relate buildings and spaces between them to human needs and scale. Now, these 4 points that I just listed out concerns mainly what you write. Okay, it concerns your narrative and your topics. So do bear in mind that some of the other learning outcomes concerns how you write as well. So this will involve 1, your demonstrated strategy for the presentation of your research, and 2, your research practice from a range of primary and secondary sources, i.e. how the sources are applied and synthesized, use a range of appropriate methods of research and inquiry. So let me use other words. It is important to have a very good topic and critical reflections that you developed center around this topic. Yet it is equally important that how you develop and articulate your narrative and argument. With all these said, ultimately, the aim of this module is for you to produce a well-argued and coherent written thesis, and it will be of approximately 10,000 words. We give a certain flexibility, which is plus and minus 10% of the word limit, but in general, 10,000 words is a very good length to develop an elaborated and well-articulated scholarly work. So in general, your dissertation is expected to contain these elements. You do not have to write these down because you can find all this information in your module handbook. So this page I'm presenting here only provides you an example. So this is rather a standardized format of your dissertation. You may structure and title each chapter as appropriate for individual work, or you may want to give a slight different proportion to a certain chapter of your work. But this is something you can discuss with your tutor, and you have to agree with your tutor, basically. So the induction that I'm giving right now and the presentation I'm doing, all the information are in fact extracted from our module handbook. So where to find this information? I hope by now you already know where to find all this information, but in case you don't know yet, Moodle is really the main platform where module resources are uploaded and shared. And let's have a look at the Moodle page of dissertation module. When you enter Moodle, you will see these different sections. Under the section of general information, you find announcement, general meeting space, but most importantly, the dissertation guidance 21 and 22. So this gives you a very comprehensive listing of all the information that we're going through right now. You'll also be able to find your dissertation tutor allocation 21 and 22. So these are the most important two information that you should really understand right now. And I would highly recommend you to spend a good 20 to 30 minutes to download the dissertation guidance 21 and 22 and read it through. You are now all allocated a tutor, and they are to supervise your dissertation. This allocation is developed on the basis of the outline research proposal that you submitted at the end of term 1. If you do not know who your tutor is, please do go to the Moodle page. Tutor allocation can be found under the dissertation guidance, and it is critical that you understand who is tutor now and to understand their in general research expertise and research interest. We will have another meeting of IME lectures next week in the morning, and then the rest of the module consists of intensive tutorials. What you must do is that you present your work to the tutor promptly, especially if there are aspects that you're struggling with. Your tutor will then be able to support you and offer advice to improve the situation. Do feel reassured that your tutor understands your research area very much, and they will be able to address your questions and concerns. So do not hold back if there's any questions. we always encourage you to address your question as early as possible rather than just leave it until it becomes a real issue. The role of your tutor is to guide and discuss almost all aspects of your work, including the content, the methodology, the overall structure, style, and final presentation. They will also be able to give you written format on your draft submission by the end of this term. However, please do bear in mind that it is not the role of your tutor to proofread and correct spelling or grammatic errors. So make sure you leave enough time for language support and refine as it is reflected in the assessment. And for those of you whose first language is not English, please bear in mind that do not use online translation software as they do not work well. I think in a way, you can feel reassured that the overall dissertation writing process will be supervised and facilitated by your tutor. However, you must also remember that you are responsible to your work progress. So this means you should plan things beforehand and make sure your work can be reviewed and discussed in the tutorials. The tutors cannot help you without you doing your work. I think one of the very positive things is that you have already practiced academic writing in the cities and urbanism essay, which I hope the most of you have now submitted. Yet do realize that writing a 10,000 word piece is quite different to writing a 3,000 words one, and you will definitely want to make sure that your progress is more well organized or more structured compared to the previous CU essay writing. Like I said, your tutor is always your first point of contact, and they will be able to address your questions promptly. However, if you've got general concerns with regard to the arrangement of the module, or you think you need an extra hand to help you with certain questions, you can always drop me an email and I will try to help you as much as I can. So my email address is probably something that you want to write down because this is not on the dissertation handbook. And as always, Dr. Lucy Montague is the anchor of the program, so she's always be able to help you with some particular situation, if there's any. So now let's talk about time frame, which I think might concern you the most. It is definitely critical that you arrange your time wisely, because we in fact do not have much time as we'd imagined. So I've listed two numbers here, 9 plus 2. I would have let you guess, but I don't want to stress you out. So the first number, 9, that means we'll have in total 9 sessions of tutorials before the submission of your draft dissertation. So remember, when you are required to submit your draft dissertation, you should already be a complete piece of work. So in a way, you can't already complete the general writing of your dissertation. And before that, you will only have 9 sessions of tutorials. And 9 looks quite a lot in a way, but it is not, because the first tutorial session is only half day. It follows the RME lectures in the morning. So you will only likely to get about 20 minutes in that tutorial session, which is quite brief. This means you will only have 8 complete tutorial sessions before the submission of your draft submission. So do make sure you make the best out of these sessions. Do not go to the tutorials completely empty-handed. This is not recommended. But this does not mean that you have to write something solid or you have to complete a whole chapter or section every time you go to the tutorial. Rather, you should have something in written format to present your thoughts, your reflections, and your work progress, so your tutor can review and comment on. And this is also the most direct way that the tutors can help you with your dissertation writing. The tutorials, on handbook, it indicates that there will be a combination of group and individual tutorials. but it is most likely that your tutor will arrange individual tutorials in the majority of the sessions, as this will be the most efficient way of discussing your own work. Unless there is an inevitable circumstances that you have to request a leave, you are expected to attend all tutorials punctually. So do bear in mind that these tutorials are not optional, you can't just hop in, and the university's regular attendance monitoring rules apply. So we will be taking attendance. If we have a look at these two slides here, you can see that I try to make the timetable rather structured. Every week I have given an advised progress indicating what you should have done or should be doing in that week. But there will be some variations according to your work progress and the tutor's arrangement. But I will recommend you to compare your work progress with this timetable from time to time. So if you've noticed that your own work progress is way behind what's indicated here, then it is definitely something that you need to flag and talk to a tutor. It will be rather undesirable that you end up spending, for example, the first 5 sessions of tutorial doing not much of things and leave the last 3 tutorials very intensive and stay up overnight to catch up with your progress. Here you can already see the submission dates, but just to make it easier for you to remember, we've got 2 very important submission dates. The first one is your draft submission, and like I said, although it is draft submission, you should already have a complete piece of work, so it is already a coherent and readable good dissertation, and it is on the 28th of March 2022. Then you have a final submission, which is on the 3rd of May 2022. So between these 2 submissions, you have that 9+2, you have the 2 extra sessions of tutorials where you can discuss the feedbacks that you get from your tutor and you can refine your dissertation. But again, do not take it as the opportunity for you to write something brand new or adding a completely different chapter. That's not how these tutorials are designed for. And eventually, you will have a single PDF file to be submitted to Moodle via Turnitin. And the usual submission progress will be quite similar to other modules. Now, I want to address mostly in this how section that mostly the practical aspect of your dissertation writing. And this is because A, comprehensive method discussion is already given in last term's RME module, so I have no intention to recap the whole module. But I have to remind you that do not see this dissertation module as a separate thing from the RME. Rather, they're integrated and closely connected. So always jump back to what you've learned from the RME module. And 2, later we're going to have Demetria's methodology recap session. So the important knowledge and techniques will be rediscussed. So what I want to do in this very quick section is to tell you to realize the flexibility and the necessity of monitoring and reconsider your research method. As explored in the RME lecture series and reading list, there is a range of methodology and methods that are at your disposal to form inquiry into a chosen topic. The method chosen, as we indicated on the handbook, should be appropriate to a research question and achievable within practical constraints. So these 2 parts are definitely equally important. Not only you should consider how your method can address your research question, you must also consider how feasible the methods are. And this is always important, but it is particularly important now as we still have the global pandemic going on in the background. So in a perfect world, you'll be able to conduct extensive, in-depth face-to-face interview, for example, or long-term ethnographic work or very frequent site visits. However, it is probably less the case right now. So if your method involves what I just indicated, do keep an eye on the government's COVID guidance and keep active communication with your tutor, ideally next week or no later than the week after. Although most of you have conducted a piece of empirical research based on your research proposals, for example, most of you have a particular case study, this does not mean that the production of new primary data, for example, through in-depth interviews, site surveys, measurement or questionnaires, is only acceptable mode of data gathering. You might well use other forms of data, such as theoretical works or archive materials, to assemble your research. So something like the theoretical or historical discussion of a urban theory, for example, the new urbanism, is completely acceptable. What is important that you make sure you back up your claims with some kind of data or evidence, like I prefer in arts and humanities. So theoretical discussion is fine, it is perfectly viable, as long as it starts with corresponding research question and it tackles logically and coherently in a way that is supported by viable evidence, like quotations and arguments from established and acknowledged sources. So here I have to remind you that Wikipedia or websites like Baidu are not scholarly acknowledged sources. You have to be careful about these websites. Now, before we move on to the very quick introduction of useful resources, I just want to remind you to consider the necessity of research ethics, or if you ever need a research ethics. Research ethics serves the application of fundamental ethical principles to research activities. This will include, but not restrict to, for example, the design and implementation of your research, the respect towards your participants, the use and management of your own research data, and scientific misconduct. So all of you must adhere to the university guidance on research ethics. It is listed by the university and the link is on Moodle's handbook. You can also just search it directly. I think it's the first result that pops up on the web. So for us architectural researchers, research ethics are principles that guide you how you should work with, most importantly, your research participants and their data, other researchers and colleagues, the potential users of your research, as well as other people and institutes that you engage with. So failure to comply with research ethics rules can be considered as an academic misconduct. You must consider if research ethics applies, particularly when you think your research will largely involve human participants, and it will become extremely important to consider these rules when your participants are vulnerable group, for example, children, older people, or people with health condition. You should also consider this when your question involves personal and sensitive data. So you cannot conduct any research activity before you obtain a research ethics approval, even if you ignored the rule and conducted your activity and gathered a huge amount of data. If you do not have that ethics approval, you cannot use these data in your dissertation. It is considered a misconduct. So do make sure you consider your method carefully and discuss this with your tutor. If your tutor suggests you that a research ethics application is necessary, you will need to make sure that you leave enough time for the approval application. The university usually suggests you to apply for approval at least 4 to 6 weeks before your research starts. So that's something you should really plan beforehand. And again, If you ever have concerns, or if you're not sure whether this is necessary or how you should do it, or how you can adjust your research method to avoid the fuss about research ethics partially, you should discuss this with your tutor. Here I've listed out some very useful links. The first one is the RME module link. Like I said, you should always reflect back on the module and think how the things you learned can contribute to your dissertation writing. These two modules are not separated. The second link is particularly important. That is the methods at managers link. Again, you do not have to write these links down because they are all in the handbooks. But here on the website, you'll be able to find a range of resources of research methods and different themes and how you can develop them. Referencing guidance are particularly important. Again, they're on your handbook. Make sure you adhere to have a reference style for your dissertation writing. And this is again indicated in your handbook. We do not accept other reference style. MMU has a very comprehensive and easy to follow video guide on the reference style, so I suggest you to take a good 20 minutes to browse these websites and to watch these videos thoroughly. How to avoid prejudicing. I recommend you to watch this video. It is available on your Moodle and also on YouTube. So it guides you through some of the most fundamental principles with regard to how to use reference properly, how to avoid misconduct, and how to eventually avoid prejudicing, because this is a serious issue that everyone should try your best to avoid. I know some of you will have doubts and not sure how the quality should be and how a dissertation might look like, because for the most of you, this is the first time that you are writing a 10,000 words dissertation. So I do recommend you to go to our program's front page on MFC's web, and you will be able to find a list of previous students' work uploaded on issue. I'm not saying that you should take works from previous years as a template, because our requirements and our handbooks changes every year. I am suggesting that you can have a browse at previous works and just to understand how the quality should be and what a dissertation look like. But do not take them as your template, or do not copy everything from other people's work, because as I said, our requirements do change from year to year. Now, before I wrap up this very concise and brief session, I've developed some of the scenarios for you to judge whether this is the right thing to do or not, and why. Those who are in my CU group will know that I like to call out people randomly, so I hope someone will volunteer to answer these questions. So first scenario, on the 20th of March, Joe realized that he wants to do some in-depth face-to-face interviews with his participant. He is reviewing children's outdoor space design in the UK, and he thinks it would be a brilliant idea to add in some interview data in his dissertation. Can anyone tell me if Joe is making a good decision? Volunteer, please. Anyone? Feel free to unmute yourself and tell me what you think of Joe's decision. Is it a good idea to start conducting face-to-face interview on the 20th of March?
Yes. I think it's too late, because on the March, maybe we should submit a draft.
Who is speaking? Because I have a small screen, so I can't see you.
I think it's a good idea, but maybe it is too late, because at the March, maybe it should submit the draft.
Yes, very nice. So We have two key dates. One is the 28th of March. That is when you should submit your draft dissertation. By then, you should already complete your whole dissertation writing. So the 20th of March is way too late to develop a new research method. And another point is that because Joe's proposed interview involved children, that's a very sensitive research method, and that definitely requires research ethics approval. That means you should at least apply for approval 4 to 6 weeks in advance, way before this. So no, Joe should not be doing this on the 20th of March. Very nicely done. Thank you very much. Second scenario, Joe does not have enough time to check his references and citations in the draft dissertation, but he thinks that he has written this dissertation on his own. So this is his own work, and he thinks it is therefore fine to submit a draft dissertation without any references. What do we think of Joe's decision? Any volunteer? So essentially, Joe is thinking, because this dissertation is his own work, he's literally typed every word on his own, and it belongs to him. So it is okay to leave the dissertation without any citations and reference list. Is that a good decision? Anyone? No, it is an extremely important issue, and it is not okay to submit your dissertation without any citation or reference list, even though you've hand-typed every single word in your dissertation, because we have to submit it to Moodle via tinting, which is a plagiarism check. And if you do not include any reference in your dissertation, then it will be considered as a scientific misconduct, and it will fail your work. So make sure that you include proper citation and references in your dissertation. It is not optional, you must have it. Third scenario, Joe stayed up for days and finished writing his CU essay in a week. And he decided to do the same and finish his dissertation in 3 weeks, because CU essay is about 3,000 words and dissertation is 10,000 words. So he figured it's 3 times of the overall working time. What do we think of Joe's decision? Anyone has any idea? I will call out people randomly. I see someone just unmute themselves.
Hi, I think it's not a good idea to do your dissertation in 3 weeks because you need to have some deep thinking about your work. It's not enough time.
Very good answer, thank you very much. So just because it's 10,000 words, so that's 3,000 times 3, that doesn't mean you can finish it using 3 times of the time. A 10,000 word piece of work requires much longer time of preparation and requires very organized work progress. So although I know that some of you might not be able to resist the idea of stay up and for the writing, it is definitely not advised. Please do follow the timetable that I provided in the handbook and make sure every week you're making a progress, okay? Last scenario, and this is a very interesting one. So due to COVID restriction, Jill decided to use archival study as his primary method. So he will be visiting archives and reading different materials. Even though his tutor has previously mentioned the possibility of stakeholder interview, so Joe ignored that and decided to do archival research instead of stakeholder interview because he's concerned about COVID restriction. What do we think of Joe's decision? I can understand why you hesitate, because so far Joe's been making a lot of bad decisions. But in this scenario, Joe is being perfectly rational and feasible. If the COVID situation changes and if the reality condition does not allow, do think of alternative research methods such as archive study or make your dissertation rather theoretical based. As I said, this is perfectly viable. So stakeholder interview, most likely to be face-to-face, can be a challenge under COVID restriction. So in this case, Joe is making a very good decision. So I hope you have this awareness that you can adjust your research method in accordance with the reality and be very safe in the progress of your dissertation writing, right? Now, this is my induction for the overall module. Most of these information, except from that 4 very interesting scenarios, are on your handbook, so please do read it. Demetra's methodology recap will now follow. We're running a bit over time. I do apologize. So Demetra, do you want to start right over?
Yes, thank you so much, Yu-Chao.
I've stopped everything, so you should be able to share your screen. So while Demetra will represent to you the most important knowledge and techniques that we can extract from the RME module, I think the most important thing for you to remember that the point of doing this is that the RME module is closely linked to your dissertation writing. So do visit it back from time to time, and the resources are also available on Moodle. Now, Demetra, the floor is all yours. I will mute myself.
Can you see the full screen? Can you see the presentation on full screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, so this is going to be a short recap of some of the things that you've already experienced in your research methods lectures together with MArch and landscape architecture students. It's a very kind of brief presentation, kind of wrapping things up, recapping things. But I think it's a good idea to kind of revisit some of those ideas and some of those tools that were discussed in the research methods. I know a lot of them, I know it was a lot of information to take in, especially as the lectures covered a lot of material in a short period of time. So this is kind of a simplified version of that. Please do let me know in case my slides are not moving or something. Okay, so when people ask what is theory good for, I like to tell them that it's like a box of tools. We use theory in order to understand, in our case, cities, buildings, processes that happen within the urban environment. I see it as a way to kind of try to understand why things happen the way they are, why they're structured the way they are, to unfold different happenings, to pinpoint to actors that are involved in these processes, and generally to make sense of why cities are the way they are. I know that there's kind of a disconnect between theory and practice, but from my understanding, theory comes from practice. It comes from experience. And this is what I would like you to consider your dissertation to be, a reflection of your experiences, the knowledge you have gained in this course, things you have read, things that you're troubled by in terms of architecture and urbanism. and to choose a topic that is interesting to you, something that you would like to investigate, something that you're kind of questioning. My advice would also be to start writing as soon as you can, not necessarily your dissertation per se, but to get used to writing, to get used to describing things. And you've already had a go at that with your cities and urbanism essay, but it's also a good idea to keep a diary, to annotate your sketch, learn to annotate your sketches, describe things you see. Take a bus ride in the city and try to describe the bus ride. Try to describe the people that come in and out. I know it's particularly difficult in a language that is not your mother tongue, but the more you write, the easier it gets. So try to do this as a weekly exercise where you try to fill a page, where you take a walk, a run, anything, do something in the city, and you try to put it down on paper. And I'll give you an example. This is a really good book. It's a classic. But I love the way that Calvino describes cities. It's a short book. It's very interesting. It's a short book. I would highly recommend it. These are made up cities. They're based on existing cities, but it kind of puts you in this position of trying to figure out what city is Calvino talking about here. He describes the city through the happenings, through the people, through the kind of the daily interactions that happen in those cities. So take this book and have a look at how he writes, how he describes things. The other really useful book for me when it comes to describing cities and describing urban processes is Paris, the Invisible City by Latour. And I think we've already had a part of that in our reading groups, if I'm not mistaken. This is the digital version of it. If you Google Paris, the Invisible City, Latour, it'll come up. There was a digital version that worked on Flash. I know that Flash is dead now, so I don't know if it works. Maybe on PCs it still works. But this is also a good example of how to describe what happens in a city. It's based on a set of movements, a set of moves. So moving from one location to another, and from one mini story to another. And all of these are connected together, and they speak of a particular process that happens, that takes place in Paris. So what is a dissertation? A dissertation is not commonly the place for you to discuss your design proposal. It's a platform for you to engage critically in an architectural or urban issue that you have either observed or read about or experienced. I would discourage you from looking for practical design solutions in your dissertation. I would rather ask you to, if your dissertations are somehow related to your design work, they deal with the same topic, I would encourage you to explore those topics through a theoretical lens rather than look for solutions. The dissertation doesn't necessarily need to have a yes or no answer to it. It's an investigation. It doesn't need to come up with, it doesn't need to propose a solution. It's an investigation of a topic. And there are no right or wrong answers within that investigation. The dissertation is also a theoretical reflection, which uses three main compositional elements: your research methodology, methods, and empirical evidence. Your research methodology presents an understanding of the philosophical framework within which you see your inquiry, the how you think about things. This is the theoretical background, your understanding of how we see the world that you use in order to do this investigation. Your methods describe and justify. Here you will describe and justify the methods of your research and analysis. So these are the specific tools that you use to conduct your research. The methodology also justifies these tools. So where do these methods that you chose come from? What is the theoretical background of these tools? So for example, if you're using ethnographic research, why are you using ethnographic research? Why is that the best tool for your particular topic? This is something that you will explain in your research methodology as well. You would also explain, where does ethnographic research come from? So how did it come about? Just sort of a brief explanation of what is this method? Why am I using it? The empirical evidence is the data that you collect and document in order to that you will later combine in your empirical chapters. Empirical evidence is collected through primary and secondary sources. Some primary sources include interviews, photographs, original documents, observations, sketches, artifacts, recordings, video. Primary sources serve as an original source of information about the topic, and usually sort of original pieces of work, original pieces of research have some form of primary source. As I already said, the dissertation should not be a design proposal. It's a critical theoretical investigation of current urban problems, but always based on empirical evidence. So how to structure your dissertation? I would say that you can start by identifying a research problem. A research problem is a general statement that requires further investigation. It could be a set of tensions. It could be a controversy. You could find it in relevant literature. You can find a controversial topic in newspapers, on social media. It could be something that you've observed yourself. The research problem expresses the need to further clarify experiences, processes, developments, transformations, or causal relations. You can pose some of these questions to help you identify or clarify the research problem. Why is this research important? And these things are important for you to express in the introduction of your dissertation as well. So think about, why am I doing this research? Why is it important for me to communicate these ideas to someone else? And who is my audience as well? So think about who is reading this dissertation. What real life or everyday problem, issue, question, or context does the research relate to? And what is this research ultimately trying to achieve? So here we kind of follow the what, how, and why. So what is this research about? How am I going about investigating this? And why is it important? So I would suggest I can share this these lecture slides later on for you to kind of come back and have a look at them. So the research problems, so from your original research question, you can come up with a set of research problems. So the original research question is a little bit more general. Your research problems address that research question, and they expand on that topic further. So research problems express societal dynamics, historical discontinuities, understandings and representations, geographical disparities, production, disruption, and articulation. So your research questions unpack your original research problem. They identify key dimensions of it, they unfold it, they set this research design of your dissertation in motion. It can also hint to literature that is going to be used in the study. So the research questions, they dissect the research problem into smaller chunks. I would also expect you to have a set of clear aims and objectives in your dissertation. The aim is a broad statement that tells us what this dissertation wants to do. What is this dissertation about? This should indicate ways through which the answers will be searched. The objectives are the specific steps that you will take to reach that aim. There should be measurable, and they usually start with to design, to compile, to register. So to give you a couple of examples, the aim, the what is kind of broader and more general. This research aims to provide a better understanding of infrastructures in the making and their relationship to the city by focusing on the complexities of the Blanca project, So you see that it's a general statement. It deals with a particular project, but it's a general statement about infrastructures and their relationship to the city. Now, the objectives will tell us how we're going to do that. So the first objective could be to map the controversy of this project by tracing key intersecting and conflicting concerns of heritage, traffic management, and environmental protection. Now, ideally, you would have 3 or 4 of these objectives. Because these objectives unpack the larger aim, ideally, you would have 3 or 4 that then could be answered within your empirical chapters. I would also suggest that you create an outline. So, as Yucha already said, the dissertation is about 10,000 words. You'll have about a 300-word abstract, 1,000 words in your introduction, 8,000 words in your main body, and 1,000 words in your conclusion. Then you also have appendices, bibliography, and list of images. The introduction is kind of like a mini dissertation. Here you prepare us for what's to come. You tell us what you're going to do in this dissertation. So try to remember that you're not writing a novel. You're not trying to, keep us guessing what's going to happen. You kind of need to tell us beforehand what you're going to do and how you're going to do this. So this is what the introduction is for. Here you present the problem. What, where, why is it important? What is the context of this problem? Where is it located? How is it relevant to kind of broader issues, to more global issues, perhaps? Pose your research questions. Tell us what this dissertation does to address this problem. So that's your aim, and how you're going to do that. That's the objectives we talked about. Also tell us, or try to tell us, which is a little bit more difficult in a master's dissertation, how is this an original contribution to knowledge? Now, remember, we're not expecting you to reinvent the wheel here, but perhaps tell us how your perspective and your study adds to this conversation. At this part, we will also expect you to talk a little bit about the structure of your dissertation. So how do you structure your chapters? Very briefly, what goes in each of those chapters and what you expect to find. So it's literally like a mini dissertation. Now, the main body, which is approximately 8,000 words, will contain, and this is a suggestion, it doesn't need to contain a context chapter. Here you would do your literature review, describe your methodology, possibly the context of your case study. So here you so in the literature review, you place yourself within existing conversations that other scholars have started about your topic. You describe the approach that you take for this study, and you talk about the methods, the tools that you use to conduct this study. And you can also tell us about your case study. So what is this particular project or this particular event that you're investigating? In the following chapters, your empirical chapters, you will discuss, present, and analyze your case based on the data that you have collected using your selected methods. So for example, if you used interviews, archival research, ethnographic study, visual methods, this is where you will combine that data and form it into coherent arguments. I would suggest that every one of your chapters follows a particular theme and a particular argument. So you have the larger hypothesis and the larger argument for your dissertation, and then each of your empirical chapters is kind of speaks to that larger argument by forming smaller sub-arguments that work as a whole. All chapters should have an introduction, a main body, and a conclusion, which will seamlessly lead to the chapter that is to follow. So it is good that you follow the structure. The why, the what, why, and how should follow you throughout the dissertation, in each chapter, in each paragraph, and in the dissertation as a whole. It's important that you communicate your ideas, or you try to communicate your ideas in a coherent manner. The conclusion is a summary of what has been said throughout the dissertation. So traditionally, the conclusion doesn't contain any new information unless you want to talk about suggestions for further research. But the conclusion is a recap of what you have discovered in the main body, what you have already explored in the main body. So I'll go through this quickly because I'm concerned with time. So the purpose of the literature review is threefold: to tell us what has been said up to now within the topic that you're investigating. So you look for authors who've written about something similar. And you tell us very briefly how they researched that particular topic and what their findings were. The second purpose is for you to place yourself within that discussion. So how does your dissertation add to that conversation? And the third one is for you to point out a gap in literature. I'm not going to stick to this third one because, as I already said in a master's dissertation, it's quite difficult to point out an explicit gap. So let's just say that we would like you to kind of express how you contribute to these scholarly discussions. You can find some of this literature in the readings that we've already gone through in our seminars, readings that were suggested in lectures. Your tutors can make suggestions depending on your topic, and you're also expected to go to the library, look for books, go to the online libraries, look for journal articles that are relevant to your research topics. Now to differentiate a little bit of methodology from methods, and I know that this is difficult to grasp. So this is how you're going about gathering your data. Your methodology contains information about your approach, the methods, the sampling procedures, ethics, validity, and reliability of your data collection. So this is where you tell us that the research you conduct is valid and reliable. The methodology is the rationale for your research. It's the theoretical background of your research, and it's the lens through which you approach your research. let's call it a general strategy, a general research strategy that outlines the way in which you undertake your research. Your methods, on the other hand, are the specific tools that you use to answer your research questions. I already gave a few examples. So you could use interviews, you could do ethnography, you could do archival research. There are so many different methods that you can use depending on what your topic of research is going to be. In your methodology, you would answer some of these questions. So what approach does your research necessitate and why? What is the theoretical background of this approach? What methods are linked to this approach? Which methods did you decide to use and why? So how are these methods useful for your study? You could say what other methods you could have used and did not, but why? But I'm not gonna insist on that. How are you going about gathering your data? So are you doing interviews? Are your interviews structured, semi-structured? Are you sending out forms for people to fill out? How are you gathering all this data? And how will you evaluate it? So how are you going to analyze it later on? If you have participants, how do you choose your participants? And what kind of ethical considerations does your research project encounter? So for example, if you're interviewing, this is particularly important in the medical field. If you're interviewing patients or minority populations, then there are ethical considerations within that. Of course, there are ethical considerations within architectural research as well that you might want to think about. This is a good book about research design. You can find it in the library. It analyzes what I've already covered in this lecture in pretty good detail. And another good book is by our colleague Ray Lucas on research methods for architecture. And this book deals specifically with visual methods in architecture, like sketching, observation, more, I would say, creative methods in research that you can also use to investigate your topics. Okay, 2 more minutes. You definitely need to use images and graphics in your dissertation, as this is an architecture and urbanism research. I would suggest that you use them carefully to guide your storyline. So don't just copy paste photographs or graphs or whatever in your piece without explaining what they are and why they're there. So use them carefully. Use them to kind of to guide what you're saying in the text. Avoid making statements without referencing them. Larger statements need a reference. We need to know that that they're legitimate, that there's some legitimacy to what you're saying. And your referencing needs to follow, your citations need to follow statements that aren't explicitly yours. If you take a quote straight from a book, it needs to be in quotation marks, followed by reference in the MMU Harvard style. You can find that in your guidebook. Check before submission, check that your referencing is done correctly. Even if you use automatic referencing software, it can often make mistakes. Be careful with your paragraph structure. We've already said that. Try to follow the what, the how, and the why across your dissertation. I would suggest to avoid creating huge paragraphs. They should be clear and easy to read, and start writing. Your text needs to mature on paper. write it, leave it, go back to it, edit it. Although it's not a design project, it kind of is like a design project, because you wouldn't design a thing overnight. You would start with a draft. You could throw away that draft, go back to it, fix it, rethink it, start over. The same goes with writing. It's not a process that you do from beginning to end and you never go back to. It's something that needs to be done and redone and rewritten constantly in order for it to be coherent and in order for it to be a good research piece. Use library resources. Yeah, I'll stop there. Any questions?
Hello, I have a question. In what you said before, you say the literature review, but on your slide of the outline, I cannot know the literature review is belong to which part.
So I would say before your empirical chapters, so in your so-called context chapter, where you introduce your research. So after your introduction and before your empirical chapters.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Hello. I have a question about like the research method course. Like we have an outline proposal. You mentioned our record. I think last time we only handled like the 815 words, so we need to continue writing the 2000 word. Like when this should be done. Like outline proposal is related to the dissertation, right?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure which.
Like the research method course, like the part 1, like outline proposal, they required 2000 word. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so, but I'm not sure when do you know when the deadline for that is?
I would advise you, can everyone see my screen? So since you've already been allocated with a tutor and we will start our tutorial sessions, I would suggest you to follow the rough timetable that I listed in the tutorial schedule. So basically, you should already start refining and deciding on your topic and refine your research questions. And you should follow this timetable to start writing each component or drafting each component of your dissertation. Not completely sure why you think you need to rewrite your proposal, because that is mostly for the sake of tutor location. Where do you find that information that you need to rewrite your proposal?
No, not rewrite. Like last time, we only asked to writing 800, but the requirement I think is 2000 word. The proposal.
Are you talking about the research methods essay?
Yeah. So we need to continue writing those 2000 word.
That's the proposal you submitted is for your dissertation module.
Yeah.
So your dissertation writing will be some sort of individual tasks where you sort of follow the timetable that I listed here, while it's, I think, like Dimitri said, what you said is the RME essay, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a different module.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and again, like I said, I understand this is quite, it can be challenging and somewhat confusing because we're having parallel modules and assignments. So do visit back to the RME module page and check on the brief. Okay, so that's a sort of different task besides your dissertation writing. Like I said, these two modules are closely linked, but they are different assignments for that. So the RME module page is where you find information on the particular question you're asking on.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay, if there are no other questions, maybe we can.
Yes, so if there's no immediate question for Dimitra and no immediate question for me, again, let me remind you, the comprehensive handbook for this particular module, dissertation module, is on Moodle. So please do log into Moodle, where you can find this guidance with regard to your submission, the required assignments, where to submit, and also please do check your tutor allocations. If you've got any concerns or urgent questions, then here's my email. Feel free to get in touch, right? Any other questions?